On a cold morning in March, something shifted behind the palace walls. No one outside the castle knew it yet. But inside, tension hung in the air like a held breath thick, suffocating and impossible to ignore. James had been serving the royal family for 12 years. Not as security, not as a bodyguard. He was a royal guard, which meant something different. It meant he stood at attention while history happened around him. It meant he saw things no one else was supposed to see. And it meant he kept those things buried so deep inside himself that sometimes he wondered if they were real at all. The message came through his earpiece at 6:47 a.m. His supervisor's voice was clipped. Urgent. Guard detail needed. East Corridor. William's private chambers. 30 minutes. Alone. Alone. That word echoed through James's mind. Royal detail was never alone. There were always protocols, always witnesses, always a chain of people knowing exactly where the future king was and who was with him. But this was different. This felt like something that needed to disappear from the record. James dressed in his dress uniform, black jacket, precise creases, polished boots that reflected the morning light like mirrors. He studied his face in the bathroom mirror, 38 years old, graying at the temples. Eyes that had learned to see without reacting. Good. He needed to be invisible today. He didn't know what was coming. That was the truth that made his stomach tighten. In 12 years, he had learned to trust his instincts. And his instincts were screaming that something about this was wrong. If you're watching this story, stick with us. We're about to reveal something that will change how you see loyalty, duty, and the cost of keeping secrets. Subscribe now and don't miss what happens next. By 7:15 a.m. James was positioned outside the East Corridor. The palace was still quiet. Most of the household staff hadn't arrived yet. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, making the hallway feel like a tunnel stretching into darkness. Then he heard the footsteps. They came from the direction of the main staircase. Quick, purposeful, unmistakable. James recognized them immediately. Camilla, the queen consort. She moved with the kind of authority that came from being exactly where you belonged. And she belonged everywhere in this palace. But not here. Not now. James watched her approach, her expression focused. Her jaw set in a way that suggested she already knew something was about to stop her. Her lady's maid hurried several steps behind, struggling with a leather portfolio filled with documents. When Camilla reached the corridor, James straightened. His hand moved to his belt. His face remained completely blank, the face of a man who had perfected the art of watching without judgment. "Guard," she said, her voice smooth but carrying an edge. "I need to speak with William. It's urgent. Parliamentary business. He'll want to see me." "No." He didn't respond. His training had taught him something that words could never fully capture. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man could do was stand still. Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly. She had been queen consort long enough to know when she was being blocked. But James wasn't blocking her. Not exactly. He was simply occupying the space between here and there, between what she wanted and what she was allowed to have. "I see," Camilla said quietly. Her fingers tightened around her portfolio. "So William has instructed you not to let me through." It wasn't a question, but it demanded an answer. And James knew that whatever he said next would either protect a secret or destroy it completely. The clock on the wall ticked past 7:23. His silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Camilla stood motionless in the corridor, studying James's face as if she could read the truth written somewhere in his features. She had been in the palace long enough to understand that guards didn't refuse access to the queen consort unless they had been explicitly told to do so. And if William had told him not to let her through, then William had something to hide. That realization changed the nature of her frustration. It transformed it into something sharper, something that looked like betrayal. "How long?" she asked quietly. James didn't answer. He couldn't answer. Protocol demanded that he maintain absolute discretion about any arrangements made by the royal family. Camilla tilted her head slightly. "He didn't even tell me he needed to speak with you privately." "With anyone privately? We discuss everything, guard. Everything." Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper, but it carried weight. The weight of someone used to being included, used to having access, used to knowing. "This is about what happened in Berlin, isn't it?" "The investment." "The ma'am," James interrupted gently. His voice was quiet, respectful, but absolutely final. "I cannot discuss matters relating to His Royal Highness." Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked past James at the closed door, as if she could see through it to the other side. Her maid shifted nervously behind her, sensing the tension in the air, but understanding that this was not a moment for servants to speak. "How many people know?" Camilla asked. "Ma'am." "About the meeting. How many people know that William is meeting with someone in secret? Someone important enough that he wanted you here. Someone significant enough that he didn't want me there." James remained silent. But silence, he was learning, was its own kind of answer. Camilla's expression shifted. The frustration faded, replaced by something more complex. Something that looked like hurt, mixed with the iron determination of a woman who had built her entire life on being indispensable. She had married into this family, had fought for acceptance, and earned her place through decades of careful management and strategic presence. And now, in this moment, she was discovering that she could still be excluded. "When he's done," she said quietly, "tell him I need to speak with him. Tell him it concerns the Foundation's board meeting. The German delegation is arriving tomorrow." It was a lie, and James knew it. But it was a graceful, lithe kind that let her maintain her dignity while she retreated. It was the lie of someone giving James a way out, a way to explain why he couldn't tell her where William really was, and why he really couldn't let her pass. James nodded slightly. "Of course, ma'am." Camilla turned to leave, then paused. She looked back at him, and for just a moment her mask slipped. James saw something raw, their confusion, concern, and underneath it all, a question. Did she no longer know her own family? She left without another word. James waited until her footsteps disappeared down the corridor, until the sound of her moving away became simply silence again. Then, and only then, did he move aside from the door and press a small button on his radio. "Clear," he said quietly. "She's gone." The door opened almost immediately. It was William. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that came not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of carrying something heavy and alone. His eyes were red. His hair was disheveled. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, not the formal wear James usually saw him in. He looked younger like this, vulnerable. Behind him, sitting at a small table near the window, was a woman James didn't recognize. She was perhaps 45, with dark hair and eyes that were wet with tears. She held a photograph in her trembling hands, the kind of old photograph that had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Worn soft at the creases, William looked at James with an expression that contained gratitude, understanding, and the weight of an enormous secret. "Thank you," William said quietly. "Thank you for... ... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. James nodded and returned to his position outside the door. He stood with his hands at his sides, his face blank, his eyes forward. Behind him, the door closed softly, and in the darkness of the corridor, James understood that he had just made a choice that would change everything. The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. James could hear nothing from inside the room. The palace doors were built to be soundproof, a necessary measure when royals needed privacy. But silence, James had learned, could say as much as words. His earpiece remained quiet. No one checked on him. No one asked what was happening. The palace operated on a need-to-know basis, and clearly, no one needed to know that James was standing guard over a secret. When the door opened again, the woman came out first. She wore a long coat over her clothes, and she kept her face turned down. Her hands were folded in front of her, gripping a folder. James didn't look at her directly. That was part of the code too. Some people came and went from the palace. Guards learned to look through them rather than at them. William emerged a moment later, and this time he looked different, heavier, as if something had settled inside him, something that would stay there. "I need you to drive her to the station," William said to James, keeping his voice low. "My car." The private entrance. Make sure no one sees her leave. Can you do that? It was a violation of about 50 protocols. The Queen Consort had staff for these things. There were established procedures, chains of command, official channels, but James understood why William was asking him. Because James had already proven that he could keep secrets. Because James had already chosen loyalty over protocol. Yes, sir, James said. The drive took 17 minutes. They didn't speak. The woman sat in the back of the car, her face still turned toward the window, watching the city pass by. James kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind carefully blank. As they pulled up to the station, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady, the voice of someone who had prepared this moment many times. Tell him I'm grateful, she said. Tell him it meant everything to me. Knowing the truth. James nodded in the rearview mirror. He didn't ask what truth she meant. He didn't want to know. The less he knew, the better he could protect William. As she exited the car, she left something on the seat. Another photograph. This one showed William as a child, perhaps 5 years old, standing next to a man James had never seen before. The resemblance was unmistakable. James picked up the photograph and slipped it into his pocket without looking at it again. He already understood what it meant. He already knew what secret he was keeping. When he returned to the palace, Camilla was waiting for him in the main hall. She had changed her clothes. She held herself with the rigid composure of someone who had been thinking about something difficult for too long. "Where is William?" she asked. "In his private chambers, ma'am," James said. "I believe he's resting." Her eyes searched his face. She was looking for a tell, for some indication that he would break, that he would confirm what she already suspected. But James had spent his entire adult life learning to be unreadable. "The woman," Camilla said quietly, "who left through the East Wing. The one no one is supposed to know about. Was she from Berlin?" James said nothing. His face remained perfectly calm. Camilla's jaw tightened. "You know I'm going to find out. People like me always do. We find out things. It's what we're trained to do. It's what we're expected to do." She paused. "But you're not going to help me. Are you?" "Ma'am," James said gently, "I serve the crown. All of the crown. My loyalty is to the family as a whole, not to individual members." It was a diplomatic answer, carefully crafted to sound appropriate and professional. But Camilla understood what it really meant. Your interests and William's interests are not the same anymore, and I have to decide who to protect. She looked away, and James saw her process that realization. Saw her understand that the wall between her and William Lawal she didn't even know existed until this morning had just become much thicker. "Forget to tell him about the board meeting," she said finally. "The delegation arrives tomorrow." She walked away without waiting for his response. James stood alone in the great hall, the photograph heavy in his pocket like a piece of evidence, like a sin, like a truth that would eventually demand to be heard. 3 days passed. 3 days of maintaining the facade, of standing guard in corridors, of watching William's face as he moved through the palace, pretending that nothing had changed. 3 days of watching Camilla research something she couldn't name, make phone calls to people she wouldn't acknowledge, piece together a puzzle with information that everyone was conspiring to keep from her. On the 4th day, Camilla confronted William in the private dining room. James didn't witness it directly, but he heard about it through the palace staff whispers about raised voices, about documents scattered across the table, about a conversation that had shattered something fundamental in the marriage. He also heard about William's confession, about the man in the photograph, about the affair that had happened when Camilla was in South Africa for a charity event, about the woman who had kept the secret for 30 years and had finally, at the end of her life, decided that her son deserved to know his biological father. Camilla had locked herself in her chambers for the entire next day. When she emerged, her face showed no emotion, but her eyes showed everything. They showed a woman who had built her life on an image that was suddenly incomplete, who had believed in a partnership that contained a fundamental lie, who had to decide, minute by minute, whether to stay or leave, whether to forgive or destroy. James watched her during this time. watched her navigate the palace corridors with the precision of someone who was performing normalcy. The household staff noticed nothing unusual. The press noticed nothing unusual. But James noticed. He noticed because he had become the keeper of her pain, the witness to a betrayal that she couldn't speak about, couldn't acknowledge, couldn't even properly grieve in public. One evening, about a week after the meeting in William's chamber, Camilla asked James to drive her. Just her. No entourage, no official business. They drove out of the city, toward the countryside, toward rolling hills and open spaces where no one could see. She didn't ask him to speak. She didn't ask him to explain or justify or take sides. She simply sat in the back seat while James drove, and somewhere along the way, she began to cry. Not loud sobs, not dramatic tears. Just the quiet, relentless crying of someone whose heart was breaking in parts too small to name. And James drove, keeping his eyes on the road, understanding that his role now was not to comfort her or to fix this. His role was to bear witness to her pain in silence. To be the person who knew, and who could therefore never speak about what he knew. He should have told me, she said finally. Her voice was barely audible above the sound of the engine. Whatever happened, whatever he needed to do, he should have told me. That's what marriage is. You tell each other things, even the hard things, especially the hard things. James didn't respond, but he understood. He understood that she wasn't really talking to him. She was talking to herself, working through the terrible arithmetic of betrayal and trying to figure out if forgiveness was even possible. They drove for 2 hours and didn't speak again. When James finally turned the car around and headed back toward the city, Camilla had stopped crying. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were folded in her lap. And when she looked out the window, she was looking at the future, not the past. Not the lie that had been exposed, but the choice she would have to make about what came next. In the weeks that followed, the palace existed in a strange state of tension. Officially, nothing had changed. William attended his engagements. Camilla attended hers. They appeared together at events, performed their roles, presented the image of a functioning family to the world. But anyone who looked closely could see the fracture, could see the space that had opened between them, the way they didn't quite touch anymore, the way their eyes didn't meet with the same warmth, the way conversations, when necessary, were conducted with the measured politeness of strangers. Camilla had made a choice. She hadn't left. She hadn't made a public scandal. She had chosen to stay and manage the situation privately, which in the world of royalty meant she had chosen to suffer in silence, to smile for the cameras, to attend the board meetings and the charity functions and the state dinners, all while carrying the knowledge of a fundamental betrayal. James watched her make this choice day after day, watched her rebuild her composure, her authority, her sense of purpose. She was still the queen consort. She still had power. She still mattered. But she had lost something that couldn't be replaced, the trust she had placed in William. And James, in his role as observer, understood that he had witnessed a kind of death. Not a physical death, but the death of something that had existed between William and Camilla. The death of the assumption that they knew each other completely, that there were no more secrets. One evening, as James was finishing his shift, William called him into his private study. They were alone. William poured himself a drink, something he didn't usually do, at least not while on duty, and he looked at James with an expression of profound exhaustion. "She knows," William said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," James replied. "She hasn't said anything. She hasn't mentioned it directly." "No, sir. But she knows." William took a long drink. "I keep thinking about what I should say to her. What I could say that might fix this. But I don't think there's anything that can fix it. The truth is too big. It's too much." He looked at James. "Did she ask you questions?" "She tried, sir." "I didn't answer." "Of course you didn't. That's why I trust you." He paused. "I wonder if she'll forgive me. I wonder if she can. If I would in her position? Probably not." James didn't speak. There was nothing to say. He was a guard, not a counselor. He was supposed to maintain order, not heal it. "If she asks you directly," William said finally, "if she asks you what the woman looked like, or where she went, or anything at all, you'd tell her. You tell her everything. Don't protect me anymore. Don't lie for me. She deserves the truth. Yes, sir, James said. But they both knew that Camilla wouldn't ask. She wouldn't ask because asking would make it real. As long as she didn't know the details, she could maintain the pretense that it hadn't happened, that it was something manageable, something that could be sealed away and forgotten. The next evening, Camilla did ask James to drive her again. This time, they went to a different location, a small park on the outskirts of the city, where tourists didn't go and no one would recognize her. She sat on a bench and looked out at the empty field. "Do you know what I regret?" she asked. "I regret that I can't make this unhappen. I regret that I didn't ask questions when I had the chance. Maybe if I had pushed him to tell me, I wouldn't be sitting here feeling like everything I built was built on sand." James said gently, "I think I'm supposed to tell you something." Camila turned to look at him, and James, following the instruction that William had given him, told her everything. About the woman. About what the woman had said. About the photograph. About the simple human truth that had hidden beneath all the protocol and secrecy. When he finished, Camilla was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised him. "Thank you," she said, "for finally telling me, for treating me like I'm strong enough to know." 6 months passed. William and Camilla were still married, still together, still presenting themselves to the world as a unit. Though anyone paying close attention would have noticed that something fundamental had shifted between them. They were more polite now, more formal, as if they had agreed, without ever speaking about it, to rebuild their relationship on different terms. Not as to people who believed they knew each other completely, but as two people who understood that everyone carried secrets, and who had decided that knowing someone might sometimes mean knowing only the parts they were ready to show you. Camilla had thrown herself into her charity work with renewed intensity. She had started a new foundation focused on family counseling and marriage, support, a choice that felt like both irony and healing. Like she was trying to help others navigate the kinds of fractures she had experienced. William had become more guarded. The ease that had once defined him had been replaced by a careful awareness of his own mortality, his own imperfection. He would visit his half-brother, the son of the woman from Berlin, regularly now, though always in secret, always through channels that allowed him to maintain the appearance that nothing unusual was happening. And James remained, still a guard, still watching, still keeping secrets. He had never been asked to testify about what he knew. No one had ever demanded that he report the truth. The palace had successfully contained the situation, sealed it away, made it invisible to the outside world. But inside, in those quiet moments when James was alone with his thoughts, he understood something that no one else in the palace seemed to fully grasp. He understood that loyalty wasn't about protecting the image of a person, it was about protecting their humanity. It was about standing guard over their right to be flawed, to be complicated, to be more than the version of themselves that they showed to the world. On a morning much like the one 6 months earlier, James was assigned to escort a visitor through the East Corridor. A young man, perhaps 30, with careful eyes and the kind of nervousness that came from being in a place where you didn't quite belong. William had called him here, had wanted to introduce him to the household staff, to the palace, to the reality of who his father actually was. As James walked the young man through the corridors, he caught a glimpse of Camilla. She was standing at a window, looking out at the gardens, her face unreadable. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that moment, James saw something that gave him hope. He saw not anger or resentment, but a kind of weary understanding, an acceptance that life was far more complicated than any image could contain. Camilla looked away. She didn't acknowledge the young man. That wasn't her role, but she also didn't retreat. She simply stood there, bearing witness to the consequences of the truth and slowly learning how to live with them. Later, William would thank James again, would reinforce his gratitude for the discretion, the loyalty, the willingness to stand at the line between what should be known and what should be kept private. But James knew that the real thanks belonged to Camilla. Camilla, who had chosen to stay, who had chosen to forgive, or at least to try, who had decided that protecting her marriage was more important than protecting her pride, who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was open their arms to the complicated truth and say, I accept this. I accept you. I accept us. As James returned to his post, standing guard in a corridor where history continued to happen silently around him, he understood that his job had always been about this. Not about preventing intrusions, but about holding space for people to be human, for secrets to exist safely, for the fractures in our lives to heal slowly, quietly, without the world needing to know. The palace carried on. Its walls held their secrets, and in the gardens, life continued to grow.